Good evening, everyone. We didn't have music, so I thought I'd add some of my own, and that was the only thing I could whistle. Roger Bays is on. I should have had him come and sing for us. Welcome to the Theological Insomniac tonight. Very glad you're here. It's been a while. I wasn't on all last week, was I? Because we had our revival, first ever online revival for us. Now, I have to tell you that we did get word from Myra in Wisconsin that she knew someone that had an online revival the week before. So we lost our chance at the Guinness Book of World Records, unfortunately, for whatever that's worth. Does anybody read the Guinness Book of World Records anymore? I don't even know if it exists. It used to be like the thing to get back when you were, this big and see what was going on. I don't know. But anyway, I am glad. Oh, got that playing for me. Let's see if I can turn that off. Let's see. There. Now, I got that off. Sorry, I had my computer playing me about, 30-second delay, and that'll get you confusing. So this is the Theological Insomniac, where we have news of or discussion of the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal. That's your NAP, N-A-P, normal, abnormal, paranormal. And anyway, has been a while. Glad to be with you. Looking forward to some fun discussion tonight on the things that you want to talk about. If this is your first time for a Theological Insomniac, these are not my pajamas, first of all. And it's a very free-flowing, casual program, not the finely tuned program that we do other times. But this is just kind of, we go along with what you have to say here. And we will look at that. I'm going to set my mug on the other side of the room there. And let's just go ahead and see what you have to say. I am going to start out on YouTube. I will be going back and forth between YouTube and Facebook and seeing what it is you have to say. And I noticed that our friend Vina has a question down under. It's not late for you, Vina. What time is it for you? I don't know. It's almost 10 o'clock here in the evening. So it's probably, 10 a.m. there. So good morning to you. I don't know if you get extra credit like the rest of the people get extra credit because it's the middle of the night here. And there you are in Australia. Why do you see First John as being for the end times? The very first 4 verses seem to be talking about the then and there of John's day and age. Well, let's take a look. 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, which says, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon with our hands, have handled of the word of life. For the life was manifested, and we have seen it, and bear witness, and show unto you that eternal life which was with the Father, and was manifested to us. That which we have seen and heard, and declare we unto you, that that we declare we unto you, that ye also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son. And these things we write unto you, that your joy may be full. Now, actually, Vina, I am going to either correct your question or correct what I have said in the past. I have, as some of you know, maybe the very first verse-by-verse Bible study we did on our Thursday night Bible studies, which I believe we started in 2011 and just use a little webinar format, and some of those are still out there, available, hidden down in the depths of our website, I believe even. First John might have been the very first Thursday night verse-by-verse Bible study. I did a doctrinal study before that. So that said, it's been however many years that is, a long time, 9 years since I have taught First John. Now, what I have determined is that I don't agree with myself from 9 years ago. And that's true in a lot of areas. And that doesn't bother me. And I hope it doesn't bother you if you have a different position than you did 9 years ago, especially biblically, if we can ground it biblically to say, here, we've changed. Now, 9 years ago, I would have taken First John to be a direct message to the church, or those in the church age, we should say. And because of that, I think that there would have been a number of occasions, I'm going just by assumption from what I would remember from that, but there would have been a number of occasions where I would have had to manipulate some scriptures more than I'm comfortable doing now in order to get them to fit fully within the church age. Even, for example, verse 6, if we say we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. But if we walk in light, as he is the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his son, cleanses us from all sin. Now, that is very much an obedience-based walk with him. I would have done what probably most of the church, and I would guess even most dispensationalists would do, and that is to say, well, this is a book about fellowship. But I see now a very fine line between this is what you do to be saved. It's by grace through faith, but then to have fellowship. It begins to talk a lot. It begins to get very close to a lordship, salvation kind of thing. So I have, in this intervening time, I've said a number of times that I would apply First John to the end times. So you accurately pick that up. Now, I think that I should probably be more careful in the manner in which I word that. It relates to the end times because John was writing to diaspora Jews. With his writing to diaspora Jews, we would have to say, how much is there in the first epistle of John that actually is, shall we say, not directly connected to this church? So then, long way around to the story here, but you all are used to that with me, aren't you? Then what we would have is to say, we've got a situation in which John was writing to the Jewish flock, and it was applicable to the Jewish flock then and there in his day, as you say. But since that is not in existence today, then it's beyond that. Now, to do that, you have to put an earlier date on First John than I think is typical. And this is one of the things I really want to go back and study First John sometime. I've done that with other books to say, I need to do this. My problem is I've got lots of books I've never even gotten to that I would like to get to as well. And so First John kind of gets bumped back. But let's see what Bullinger has to say. Bullinger, of course, would always lean towards it is more Jewish, therefore more tribulational. But let's check him out and see what he has to say. I put him up on the left side of the screen. This is the introduction to Bullinger. By the way, if some of you have the Bullinger Bible, oh yeah, it's on sale. I forgot. 30% off for the companion Bible. And that makes it about $45. If you've got it, I think the introductions are fabulous. And they're not long, but I gain a lot from them. The introductions and the outlines. Now, here's the outline that he has for First John. And he always gives a full outline right at the beginning. And then later, like at verse 1:1, if we jump down to verse 1:1, he's going to give an outline. So 1:1 through 2:17. This is A on page 1870, which happens to be right here. So A is Christ, 1:1 through 2:17. Then you go to 1:1 and you see how he breaks down 1:1 through 2:17, and he breaks it down into lowercase a, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, he's got A, B, alternation, repeated alternation. He tells you what kind of outline it is. A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. And 1 goes to 1 and 2 goes to 2. So he now breaks down 1:1 through 2:17. Now, many times you could go, let's just try 1:6 and see if he breaks B1 down even further in 1:6. He does not on this case. In some places he will, and just continues to break those outlines down. Very helpful. I think he was brilliant at outlining, maybe the best there's ever been. I don't always go by him, but he's brilliant and always worth looking at if you're trying to do Bible study. So in that outline, we'll come to your question here in just a moment, Vina. In the outline, the cause and the test, the cause and the test, the cause and the test, the cause and the test. If we come back here again to the beginning, he has Christ, A. Notice this is a regular type A. This is an italicized A. So the italicized A answers to the original. And you've got the same here. It's hard to note until you know it's there. The italicized B answers to the B. That is, all this is parallel. So we've got A, B, and C is this entire section here, but it's broken down, C, D, C, D. So you've got an introversion, which is this A, B, C, B, A, B, C, B, A. And then you've got an alternation, C, D, C, D. So it goes from Christ to Christ, Antichrist to love, Antichrist to love. And you'll be able to see how he puts all that together. Now, that was just incidental to Bullinger. And we're going to see if Bullinger thinks this has to do with the end times, or maybe we should say with the Jewish times or the Jewish dispensation. By the way, if we stay up long enough, I've got some interesting articles I found from 1902 about the Jewish dispensation versus the church dispensation. We will see how that goes. So he says here, written by the Apostle John, as is proved no less by its character than by external testimony. So he agrees authorship. Written as generally understood to the circle of Asiatic churches, but it is suggested that this first epistle of John may be reckoned among the diaspora of and earlier epistles for the following reasons. Okay, that I suspected he would go there, and because he is not of the sort to apply something to the church. If anything, he errs at taking things away from the church that some of the rest of us might put in. And so here he gives an argument on why it's an earlier epistle, not a 90 AD, but somewhere prior to a 70 AD epistle, in which you would still have the Jewish assembly, if you will. He gives some reasons: the occurrence of the word parousia, the significance of the possessive pronoun, Paul's statements that John was one of the pillars, that is, the teachers of the law, and therefore a minister of the circumcision. That's an interesting argument there, probably stronger than the first two. So Paul in Galatians 2 verse 9, and of course that's an early book as well, Paul says, when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars. Now, Bullinger interprets a pillar as a teacher of the law and a minister of the circumcision. I think this is accurate, but you would need to build an argument there rather than just assume it like he does here. And the position of the epistle occupies canonically among the diaspora writings strengthens the argument that it is also to be reckoned with them. And some other arguments that he gives there. Let me just jump down here. The character of the contents indicates a much earlier date than is usually supposed. And then he's got an appendix. His appendices are wonderful. I prefer these in paper because they don't fit very well in electronic. But let's pull that out just a little bit. And here he's got the chronology. Okay, we would have to dig into that to put all that in, but my guess is along here some way. There we go. The Johannine epistles, he puts about 55, 56, 57. And so that would be in the second missionary journey, and that's let's see, is that correct? No, a little later than that. Maybe the third missionary journey. What takes, yeah, would be the third missionary journey. So during that third missionary journey, Paul still at times was preaching kingdom stuff. So let me go back to your question. Why do you see John as being for the end times? I think I would prefer to revise that statement and say I see John as a Jewish epistle during the to the Jewish diaspora, much like 1st and 2nd Peter. Now, to do that, of course, we've got to argue for an earlier date for John, and that's where we could look, for example, let's see what Schofield has to say. My guess is that Schofield does not go with an earlier date, but yeah, there we go. I brought Schofield up. He puts the date probably AD 90. Now, even the saying of that probably, I might say it's a little bit of a parrot speaking. We need to find out why. Why is it probably AD 90? Well, because, some tradition that takes place here and so said it, and that makes it probably. I don't know if that's true or not. So, you're right. I think that the first 4 verses do talk about the then and there, and therefore they're not future related like the book of Revelation clearly is the things that are to come. And yet he's still ministering to the circumcision, or it's a letter to the circumcision, and therefore it's going to fit perfectly under the law for, let's say for a messianic believer who is living in an age in which the kingdom is being offered. That is, to the saints. Would be what I would go with there. I appreciate that. Very good question there. And I am going to switch back and forth between YouTube and Facebook. So let me go over here to Facebook and see what we've got. Okay, don't see any questions there. Several hellos and good evening to you all on Facebook. It is good to see each of you. Here's one from Pastor Rick out in Alcatraz. My mom told me that she remembers people thinking that Kissinger could possibly be the Antichrist. Let's just look up while we're at it. This, of course, Kissinger was Jewish. Kissinger was Secretary of State under, was it Richard Nixon? Yes, during the days of the Yom Kippur War. He was like so many in the State Department, unlike Mike Pompeo today, but so many secretaries of state. There's something about the State Department. The nickname for the State Department is Foggy Bottom. It's kind of fitting. So he was like so many of the State Department that didn't want to support Israel because the idea was it almost is, and has been up until this current administration. And I think even, who is the Exxon guy that was Secretary of State just for a little while under Trump and ended up leaving under maybe not so great circumstances, and Mike Pompeo was brought in. I think he even had this idea. The idea was, if you support Israel, then that is a sign that you're not supporting the other nations, and therefore there's going to be turmoil in the Middle East. And the State Department always has this view of, we've got to negotiate for peace. It's always diplomacy. And while I'm just rambling here, let me go ahead and speak to this. Has there ever been a Secretary of State that became President of the United States? And maybe very early on, I don't remember any others. See here if I can do a quick search if it says anything here. My point is that is searching rather slowly. Presidents who were Secretary of State. Okay, let's see. Maybe there have been a few. My hunch is it was a long time ago. And I think that there are several, with apologies to those who might hold these positions. There are several who don't typically make good presidents. I would say doctors don't make good presidents. And I would say accountants don't make good presidents. And I would say, to a degree, and this might sound strange, but lawyers, for the most part, don't make good presidents. Lawyers are better as senators and congressmen, but the executive position. Now, let me go ahead and add Secretary of State. And the reason I say that is because they all have a vested interest in protecting a little turf. A lawyer trains himself to say, what could go wrong, and I've got to protect you from that going wrong. Well, the president has to get out there on the edge and sometimes push the envelope and sometimes, throw caution to the wind and to make some forward movement. The same thing with an accountant or a doctor. They're all trying to protect this one small area, so they get some blinders on. Secretaries of State also do that. Their blinders are negotiate for peace, diplomacy, these kind of things. We see here's the presidents who were Secretary of State and became president. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Martin Van Buren, and James Buchanan. Now that was 1849. So exactly as I suspected, Henry Clay tried. Doesn't even look like we've had a Secretary of State try since John C. Calhoun. In 1845. They're negotiating everything. Now, back to Henry Kissinger, who, of course, was one of the most famous secretaries of state. I did look up, just as I was talking here, Kissinger the Antichrist. And Mrs. Owens said she heard Kissinger was the Antichrist. Well, look, sure enough, is Kissinger the Antichrist? The Antichrist identified is Henry Kissinger the Antichrist. The unholy number, let's see, I don't know if that one, Henry Kissinger the Antichrist. You get a lot of Antichrist stuff there. Again, he's Jewish. And he's a globalist. Kissinger definitely was a globalist, and almost every Secretary of State is a globalist. This is what happens to Secretary of States, is they become globalists for whatever reason. Now, so your mom told me she remembers, she remembers people thinking Kissinger could be the Antichrist. What about Robert Kissinger? What about Robert Kissinger brought about that line of thinking? I think that what brought about that line of thinking more than anything else was probably that in the 70s, the late great planet Earth, the king is coming. There was lots of talk about the end of the world, and then you get this guy with a very strong European accent, and he's Jewish, and he's a globalist, and so his thinkings, come about through all of that, and carries all that out. Now, I am not as familiar with Robert Kissinger and his writings, his economics, and all of that goes into that particular question. So I'm going to skip that part about it. Now, is Kissinger the Antichrist? No, he's too old. And was it good thinking back then to think he was the Antichrist? No, I don't think so. I think that the Antichrist is not even going to be revealed until after the rapture. I would say that trying to figure out who the Antichrist is today would be like trying to find the church in the Old Testament. It's a mystery. It's not revealed. In fact, there's not a definitive, yes, this is the Antichrist, until that 7-year covenant is signed. And even at that, I'm not so sure that that's such a public event that it's on the evening news and Walter Cronkite comes out and says, today in the Middle East. I don't even know that you necessarily see that until you look back on it. Maybe you will, though, and certainly probably some of those who are more discerning will do so. But I just don't think, even if someone today completely fit the bill for being the Antichrist, I think it's a shot in the dark that person is the Antichrist. I wouldn't speculate on anybody being the Antichrist today. That is contingent upon so many things, and I just don't think those things fit. Who really killed JFK is, speaking of the abnormal, and the paranormal, Rick tacked that on to his questions, who really killed JFK. I've been to the 6th Floor Museum. Have you all done that at the Dealey Plaza in Dallas? If you're ever in Dallas, go there. It's very interesting. Right downtown, Dealey Plaza, you'll recognize it from all the videos, of John Kennedy and Jackie riding in the car. Looks today, the whole plaza, like it did in that day, other than a small memorial that was built for John F. Kennedy. The 6th Floor Museum is the Texas Book Depository. That building there, go up to the 6th floor where John Hinckley was with the bullet, and very fascinating museum, I would say. I highly encourage that for any of you who might be in the Dallas area someday. Of course, you can't do it now because the governor has told you to hide under the bed until the middle of May. But I don't know. I wasn't alive. Does anybody know who killed JFK? Got any theories? I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians weren't involved, but even more than that, I wouldn't be surprised if the CIA wasn't involved. You know that I'm a skeptic. There's always been a deep state, and the deep state has always been very powerful. Kennedy had some push the envelope, had that kind of push the envelope kind of presidential leadership. And so he's the one. I think, by the way, if you want to see something Kennedy, go back to his Berlin speech. I put it on my Facebook not too long ago. But just put JFK Berlin speech and find it there. And it is an anti-communist kind of speech. Now, the problem, I think, though, with JFK, and this is why I think the CIA was concerned about that, and of course, they had just come through 8 years of the Eisenhower administration, and Truman before that, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but even though Truman was a Democrat and Eisenhower was a Republican, you may remember from your history books, I remember everything in my history books, that the entire nation wanted Ike to run for president, and they had no idea which party he was in. And it was only, there was this Draft Ike campaign that took place. Of course, he was the hero of World War II, and the nation wanted to draft him. And there was a big, lot of movie stars, very famous people that had this several week thing, Draft Ike campaign with, stars and shows and everything else. He finally decided to run, but they didn't know what party he was going to run in. Now, and of course, he ended up running as a Republican. I think Truman and Eisenhower had a fairly similar worldview. Obviously, there were some differences, that as there would be anybody. But that puts from the Truman administration through the Eisenhower administration 12 years of kind of the same idea. Well, Kennedy didn't have that. Kennedy came from a very different perspective. I wouldn't be surprised if the CIA wasn't worried about that. The closeness at which, well, let me back up. I was going to say the closeness at which the Bay of Pigs nearly got, and the Cuban Missile Crisis after that, nearly got us into World War III, which would have put World War II as a tiny little blip on the radar. There was somewhat in the Bay of Pigs, but even before that, the whole Cuban thing and what was going on in Europe at the time that Kennedy was leading, he early on really fumbled the ball a number of times. And I think the CIA thought they knew better. Maybe they did. I'm pretty sure that Hinckley not Hinckley, that's Reagan, wasn't it? That, who was on the sixth floor, that he was the trigger man, would be my guess. But it's not impossible that he did it all by himself, but it's good to be suspicious, isn't it? So anybody else got an idea who killed JFK? I would be happy to hear from you on that. Or is Kissinger the Antichrist? How about that? We can talk about that one too. Here we go. And let's see. Chuck and Olive in different states are going to bed early. That's what I have on Facebook. Well, shame on you. What you act like old people or something. And of course it's later for you than it is for me. I'm in the mountain time zone. And Rick and I we'll stay up all night because he's over there on the West Coast. Now that's a good idea, Keith and Deb. While we wait, you could play Twilight Zone music. You know what I've actually thought of doing before is I don't want to sell advertising in the program because that's kind of cheap, and I sort of advertise dispensational publishing anyway, but that's my stuff. So I don't really want to do advertising in the program, but every now and then I would have to say that it's nice if I need to, take a little break or something, get a cup of water or sneeze or something to be able to have something to go to. And so I've actually thought about, having like some of these old commercials that I could jump into just at a moment's notice, having them all up, and it would fit our kind of, our theological Insomniac nighttime program here, wouldn't it? And for some reason, my computer is just really working slow tonight. This one over here. I hope the streaming's not. You'll tell me if you're having streaming problems. I think we're okay on that end. But I was trying to bring up an old commercial for you. If it ever comes up, maybe I'll eventually show it to you here. If I need a break, I'll stick in that old commercial. But yeah, some Twilight Zone music, something like that that would work, wouldn't it?
Or those in the church age,
well, should say. There we go. And now I got
because of that,
sound coming out again here.
There would have been
There we go. I don't know why I can't get Nathan to stay up and operate things, got nothing. A little baby, you can't sleep anyway, right? So let's see. Sugarland, I think it is. Can we talk about Kenneth Copeland? He certainly fits the abnormal. Fits the abnormal and is having a fit. Yeah, Kenneth Copeland. What a mess. Have you seen this? I am just going to. There we go. Having all sorts of weirdness going on in my computer here. Thank you. And I am going to jump down. Okay, you all seem to be getting sound. I'm not getting my sound bar there is looking very weird. Sorry about all that as going there, but hey, if you're not getting sound or anything, somebody wave at me or something. You know, that's my problem here on a late night. I just go on forever and don't do it. So I'm going to push a button here that I think is going to keep us on, but just takes away my switching capability. There we go. And maybe we'll give everything back and going again. Okay. It says I'm not connected, but I think I am connected. So you'll, yeah, wave if I'm not there. Okay. Let's get back to this. So Kenneth Copeland, that's where I was trying to bring up the Dr. Copeland. Have you seen, you probably have, so we don't need to necessarily spend a whole lot of time on it, but Kenneth Copeland has proven himself to be unbelievable. Unbelievably ridiculous as he first declared it to be gone by the 31st of March, I think, and then that didn't happen. And so he is calling for a giant heat wave across America that will kill it. And here's one in which he claimed he could blow coronavirus away. What's up with this guy is what I want to know. Even more than that, I think all of us understand that he's just a lunatic. But how does he get so much following? It just tells me that our society is ripe to being used and abused, and they will just keep doling out the money for it over and over again in this craziness. Here is Pastor Kenneth Copeland. I'll blow this stinking virus away. And that is April the 5th. So this is not long ago. A Texas pastor selling a new cure for the virus. Just blow it away. Check out this video. Let's see. I'm gonna see if it'll even play, because once again, I'm getting those circles there. Sorry about that. I was gonna play it for you, but then you probably wouldn't be able to sleep anyway. But yeah, if ever there was a fake, let's call Kenneth Copeland a fake. It just doesn't work at all for me. And the networks. What network is he on? I don't know. Is he on one of the? Does anybody know? Is he on the TBN or one of those particular networks? Or does he buy time on local stations? Maybe he does both. But this is let's talk about how this works for just a little bit. In whether it's TBN or by and large, I would say any of the religious channels, and this is also almost true on Christian radio. Smaller local Christian radio stations, this probably is not true, but the mega Christian networks like Salem. Salem is the biggest, I don't know how many stations Salem has, but Salem is a for-profit organization. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But they literally will just if you pay the money, they'll put you on there. And that is the great problem with all of that. And I've just seen before, and I used to be on a couple of 2 or 3 Salem stations when I had our preaching program. It's called Word for the World. It's really kind of what started our ministry outside the walls of the local church. Was an old program called Word for the World, and then we changed to Ask the Theologian. Actually, was the Word for the World was a 5-day-a-week program, and it was doing decent. We were on 400 some odd stations, and did it for, I don't know, 2 years maybe. But it was just so expensive. And the Houston Salem station, we had a decent time. I'm trying to remember, 6 o'clock in the morning, I think, which in Houston is a decent time because there's so many people. Used to be, before the governor, not the governor in Houston, in Texas. The governor in Texas has been pretty good on this thing, but the mayor but before everything was shut down, there's a lot of people listening to the radio at 6 in the morning. So we had a decent time. Well, guess what? As soon as they could sell it at a higher price, they sold it at a higher price. That is what Christian radio and Christian television is today. So you want to say, like TBN, why do you even do this? But then TBN is so messed up to begin with. So these networks are either unbelievably messed up theologically, or they're just money making. And if you pay the money, they will come. We could be, for example, on, do any of you listen to programs on One Look, I think it's called? That's a Salem. And One Look is like $1,000 a month to have your programs on there. Now, you get a lot of listeners because Salem pushes people there. But literally, if you pay the money, you can be on there. You can start your program today. Just pay them $900 some a month, and you'll be on there, and you'll get a fair number of listeners because Salem will, they do their business like that. But it's this money making scheme. So I think you've got that with these guys like Kenneth Copeland. Is they have been able to make the money. They manage the income to make more money. It's this money making thing. And honestly, I think for Kenneth Copeland, I don't even know if he believes what he says. I doubt it. I don't know if you can be that delusional. I think that he knows this gets him in the news, and he takes the idea that all press is good press. It's going to put some people to him. They're going to listen to him. They're going to send in some money. They're going to, because they've been so messed up with evangelicalism, they're going to accept it. They're going to think this is a wonderful thing. And they're looking for hope, whatever it is. And he is going to pilfer them out of their money. And he's going to make more money and buy a bigger jet and take all of that down. Stephen, thanks. Bogged down in the swamp in Gainesville, Florida, USA, waiting for one of the masters of dispensationalism. Aren't you nice? And I was thinking about that, Stephen, as I was whistling that song. Don't break any copyright laws whistling that song. And, it might happen. I've learned it doesn't take much in terms of music to get this notice from usually from YouTube. From YouTube, your video's been flagged. It's one of the reasons we don't do any music. It's another reason why last week the only criteria we had for any music is it had to be public domain music, because I knew as soon as we put a song on there that wasn't public domain, we're gonna get flagged. They're gonna either take down the video or make it very hard for anybody to see the video. And literally, it happens within 30 minutes. Of doing it. They've got this machine learning, artificial intelligence that goes through and listens to all those. And how long until they listen and say, oh, nope, that one talked about, whatever. Remember when I got kicked off of Facebook because I talked about Martin Luther? And some of the things that Martin Luther said, and just boom, they caught it as hate speech. I was just quoting Martin Luther is all I was doing, and the guy did have a bunch of hate speech. But man, it's amazingly good, if you can call it that. Roger, welcome over here to YouTube. I got a note from Nathan that does say there's a problem on our feed going to Facebook, so we're YouTube only now, and I'll just watch there. Mel thought it was Dan whistling. No, it wasn't Dan. It's me. Noon in Australia. Excellent. Okay. So Mel, speaking of JFK, this is a stretch. JFK died of a head wound. Transhumanism could possibly resurrect his image. Would not the world follow him? I believe they would. Bill Gates, of course, would have to bring him up to speed through uploading the latest and greatest AI. The resurrecting of an image, transhumanism using the body, if you will, of a JFK, whether it's the real resurrected body to be used, or as if resurrected body, or it's just a look-alike. I wouldn't be surprised if someday that doesn't become a problem. Maybe in the whole Antichrist thing, of course, the Antichrist has a head wound and comes back, and so that's exactly where you're coming from. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a stretch, but the world has this fascination with JFK, and I suppose it's because of the time in which he was. He was young, charismatic, handsome, a leader, and cut down in the prime of his life, and really in the prime of his career as well. And then all of the little things that go along with it. There certainly would be all of that. Now, you're right that Bill Gates would have to bring him up to speed, because I think, and one of these days I'll spend some more time studying this. I don't know when, maybe like, when I'm 80. I think that JFK probably could not get the Democratic nomination today. Now, obviously he could if he was resurrected from the dead and his head wound and all that kind of stuff, because that would be amazing. But with his policies, he couldn't be elected today. I've heard enough of what he said. And again, just his speech in Berlin, go back and listen to, the 4 or 5 minutes of that section that is available on YouTube. And yeah, it is definitely an anti-communist, anti-socialist speech. And it would be interesting sometime to have, Bernie Sanders run against John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and just put up, old clips of Kennedy, and have Bernie Sanders respond to him. Put him in somebody else's voice. Have Donald Trump give Kennedy lines that have been forgotten. My guess is they would attack him viciously, because Kennedy, the whole world was more conservative in the 1960s. It went downhill quick, but so Bill Gates would have to bring him up to speed. You're right. And get him up to speed in globalism. I don't think Kennedy was a globalist. Maybe the first, I'm sure you could go earlier and see some examples of this, like a Woodrow Wilson, but maybe the first modern globalist, who would it be? Gerald Ford, maybe? I don't know about Nixon. Kissinger certainly was, so maybe there was some of that in Nixon. And he certainly wanted to open the world to, China and all that kind of stuff. But even not a globalist in the sense, and probably Gerald Ford not a globalist in the sense we would have today. So that probably then would put you to a George Bush, the first George Bush, being definitely he's the globalist in the modern world. I don't know. There's a Jimmy Carter. I don't know if he was smart enough to be a globalist, or maybe he was so smart that he didn't know how to be a globalist, or didn't. He was one of those examples, kind of an accountant, who became president, and not a good thing. Stephen, did you ever figure out from smite under the fifth, what smite under the fifth rib means yet? I thought one Bible teacher told me it means stuck in the spear in the heart area. I'm having a hard time reading there. Let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 23. And no, the answer is no, I didn't. But maybe we can figure it out. And 2 Samuel 2:23. Howbeit he refused to turn aside, wherefore Abner with the hinder end of the spear smote him under the fifth something. We'll go with rib. That the spear came out behind him and he fell down there and died in the same place. And it came to pass that as many as came to see the place where Asahel fell down and died stood still. Oh, they came to see the place where Asahel fell down and died stood still. Okay, let's check the Young's literal translation. Smiteth him with the hinder part of the spear into the fifth rib. The spear coming out behind him. Okay, it went all the way through. He falleth there and dieth under it. And let's open up the Hebrew and see. He refused to turn away, struck him down, Abner, the back of the butt end of the spear. Now this has to the stomach, and the spear, went out to the stomach. Let's check Darby here and see what Darby, who is an amazing linguist, see what he had to say. Okay, they've got that too. Smote him in the belly, so that the spear came out. So here, let's take this word fifth, take the Strong's. As a matter of fact, I want this same construct, and let's find it in the Bible. Oops, excuse me, I did that wrong here. So we want this particular word. There we go. Okay. Several times we've got the fifth rib. Let's see what Bullinger has to say about it. 2 Samuel 2:23. Well, that's nice. He just doesn't tell us anything. Come on, you can do better than that, Dr. Bullinger. Don't you know? We need you here at this time. Let's try a 3:27. Fifth rib, stomach. Okay, there seems to be some indication here that the word fifth rib, we're going to check Strong's Concordance, which is not necessarily. So the Authorized Version translates as fifth 4 times. Belly, abdomen, fifth rib. Do we have a doctor on board that could? I don't know that. How many ribs are there? I don't know. There's going to be too many for that to end up down at the belly, and so 5, would that get it through the hearts? The problem in the Hebrew is going to be that they will use even different words, like the bowels is just the whole insides, whereas in English the bowels is a different thing. So pretty hard to tell there. Now let's try doing one thing. Let's look again, 2 Samuel 2 verse 23, and let's see if the Jewish organization, Chabad, has anything to say about the fifth rib. And if it does, we'll bring that up. And once again, I've got quite the delay going on in that computer. Maybe I can pull it up over here a little quicker and see What's up there? Yes, indeed I can. I just can't show it on the screen. 2 Sam 2:23. And do they have? Okay, nothing immediately came up. Chabad.org. I've mentioned it before. Chabad.org is it's a pretty good place to go to see what the Jews have to say about it. So it would be interesting if we could find one of their teachings on it. Let's keep looking at that, Stephen. I think, so you've got this Bible teacher that told you it meant struck the spear in the heart area. That might be, if anyone's skinny enough to count your ribs, go down 5 and see what you got. That would not be the majority of our audience, including me. But it appears that it got in, it came out the other side, and would be very interesting to see if we can put that together and figure that out. So does somebody have any commentary that mentions the fifth rib and what that is? The fifth rib, the belly. Can we come to something very interesting there? 2 Samuel 2, verse 23. Matt, good to see you tonight. What about Deuteronomy 6:4 and Mark 1:29 about the Shema? Sorry if I misspelled it. That's okay, because actually when you go from Hebrew into English, you can spell it however you want. That's why Hanukkah is spelled sometimes with an H and sometimes with a CH. And so just, go for it. It is not a problem there. So let's take a look here at... Let's see. So, the first commandment about God being one, it sounds like it contradicts Trinity doctrine. Okay. Yes, it does. And so let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Now, Shema is how you say it, and I'll show you why. You go to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. And you will have right here, this blue word right here. Blue just means it's in the masculine. We read from the right to the left in Hebrew, and there's the shin, Shema is how you say it right there, Shema. So it's just, that word just means hear, and obviously it's the first word there. So here, Shema, Shema Israel. And notice there's the sheen. It looks like a little fork there. There it is in Israel as well. Israel. So Shema Israel. So hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Now, this is the key is right here. The Lord our God is one. And this is why it's not a contradictory to Trinitarian doctrine, though it sounds like it's contradictory to Trinitarian doctrine. The word here, see if I can pull up some help for you. The word is actually a unity. The Lord our God is unity, if you will, or he is one as himself. Again, let me look and see if Bullinger's got anything here. Deuteronomy 6:4. He may outline this for us very well. Here we go. Yes. So Bullinger says one. Hebrew echad. It is a compound unity. And the equivalent is the Latin unus. Remember, e pluribus unus, out of many, one. a unity, a united. So echad is that unus word or even united word. So one made up of others. He gives some example. Galatians chapter 1 verse 5. The Lord called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and evening and morning were the first day. Now, first, I'm going to guess, let's jump over here to Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, and I believe that word echad is there. Let's see. It was, yes, right here. The day one. The day first. Now, the reason that's important is because it was one day that was made up of evening and morning and was part of a 7-day kind of thing. So it uses that same word, echad. Now, let's go back to Bullinger over here. So he gives some examples. Here's one of 7, one of 4, one of 24, one made up of 2, one of the Trinity, Genesis 49:16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Excuse me. The one of the Trinity would be here. The Lord God said, behold, man is become like one of us. There's a very good example right there. Again, that's Genesis 3:22. One of us. And in 49:16 again, Genesis, Dan shall be the tribes as one of the tribes. There's one of many is the idea of this particular word here. Now, echad, not yahid, which is the Latin unicus, which we get unique, a single or one only, and he gives some examples of that there, and uses that. So it's all in the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word echad, the Lord our God, is one, echad. He is a unity that is used there. Now, I think that even the Jewish people will have to admit, and you could ask any of them about the Shema, they'll be able to talk to about it. I think they will have to admit that there is it really is the Lord our God is, he is one, but there's a totality to him that all together is one. He is, unus. He is unus rather than unicus. He's unity rather than unique. Now, the Trinity is unique, and the Father, Son, Spirit. I mean, we get into these English words, we could change that. But I think that's where that is, Matt, on that particular word. I appreciate that. Now, considering back to 1 John, a question from Mel in Indiana, would John then have a twofold application, then and future? Yes. But what the difference is he would not have an application now, other than incidental. The application would be like, I started to say the book of Hebrews. Maybe the book of Hebrews isn't the best, but the book of Hebrews would work. And the book of Hebrews is applied to the Jewish people then. And the same principles will pick up after the rapture and apply later. But if you try to apply it directly today, the book of Hebrews, you're going to have a problem. 1 Peter is the same way. It was then in Peter's day. It will be in the coming day in which you're under the same circumstances, but in this day we're not under those circumstances. So those books that have a Jewish nature to them, I think that's a good way to put it, is there is a twofold or a dual application, one in that day, one in the future day. Just be careful not to put them in this day here. I think you could even say that for the Gospels, for that matter, or for many of the prophets and much of the Old Testament. But what you've got, let's take the Sermon on the Mount, for example. The Sermon on the Mount was applicable to those whom Jesus spoke. The Sermon on the Mount will be applicable to those in the future in the day of a kingdom offer. It's not directly applicable to us today, and it's when we try to make it directly applicable that we make application problems. And we have to twist and turn and pervert and manipulate the scripture in order to get it to fit today. Again, I've got a newspaper article, if I'm still able to find it here, that I will want to bring up here in a little bit. Again, if we stay up long enough, that really is kind of interesting about that applicability issue that is used today. So appreciate that, Mel. Bill Gates, the eugenics man. I like the way you put that, Matt. And Mel says, Mr. Population Control. That's exactly what he is. And I'll go with what Matt continues. Wicked man, low-level Illuminati. He is a wicked man, and yeah, probably low-level Illuminati in terms of the Illuminati as the underground. Shall we call it the deep state? The world deep state that controls everything. There is that, whether you want to call it the Illuminati or you want to reject this idea of the Illuminati, there is still in every organization, and I think even worldwide, there's a group of people that are able to pull the strings and get what they want done. You can find this, I suppose, just about in any church. You go to a church and say, who really runs this place? That guy over there, that woman over there, that family over there, these people over here. That's kind of a natural thing in humanity. Now, that I think goes bigger on a national scale and even an international, worldwide scale, where there are some people, some families, some connections that have such sway over the papacy, over the United Kingdom, over the educational institutions that bring forth our future presidents and all that kind of stuff, that, it's right there. And Bill Gates is only, I like the way you put that, low level. He's only there because of his money. His money's not old enough that he has been there a long time. Give it another few generations, if we go that far. I assume he probably has kids, doesn't he? Maybe the Gates family will become like some of those other families that, again, they are just so interconnected with all the things of this world that you don't even, there doesn't even have to be an organization called the Illuminati that has its meetings the second Thursday of every month, in Bonn or wherever. It doesn't even have to be that. It can be completely informal and still happen. And I think does. I think it's true in politics. Of course, I don't know the players, but you could go to either of the large political parties in the United States, and they've got the people there. If you went to Ronna McDaniel, I believe she's head of the Republican National Committee, right? Say, Ronna, who really pulls the shots in the Republican Party? Or go to, whatever kind of evil person runs the Democratic National Committee. Who really runs the shots? They're there. They're not the spokesman. They're not the person at the top. That's a figurehead. Somebody is pulling the strings. Every now and then they get bucked somewhere. There's an upheaval somewhere. Probably more often in the Republican Party than the Democratic Party, but not that much. Trump came in. He kind of turned that on its head a little bit. So it happens. But give it 3 days after the Trump presidency ends, and whoosh, They'll come right back. They will be there, Johnny on the spot. Bill Gates, I'm gonna agree with you, wicked man, that he has such a wicked worldview. It ignores the individual. And I see this more and more just on a regular low life level, like where I live, that the emphasis now is so much more on the collective whole than it is on the individual. I think we see this with the coronavirus response that the world has had, that it is the whole that matters and not the individual. Now, it all sounds well and good. The problem is that the more that takes place, the more you protect the whole, the less the individual loses any kind of protections. And the more the individual loses his protections, the worse that is for the whole. I'm just convinced that our nation and the blessings that it has had have been because we hold these inalienable rights that God has given. And those are individual rights. And as long as our nation protects individual rights, then the whole is going to come out okay. But when we protect the whole rather than the individual, then, it's very quickly downhill. And not going to be a good thing at all. And of course, Bill Gates would completely disagree with me on that because he is a whole person. That socialism is kind of called that. Communism. It's the social. It's the commune, the community that matters. Communitarianism. All of that kind of stuff. It's all birds of the same feather. Clint, Matthew. Let's see. John 1:14, the Word became flesh, made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father. He's speaking to Matt. Okay, I see. Talking about the triunity. That's a good, Clint, that separation is a good way to separate that, the triunity. And I would guess if you go back, you would find that, again, in Trinity, or triunity as we have it here, there is that idea in Echad, in Unus, in, even in a sense in the way we use one, today, out of many, one. Thank you. Let's see. Colossians 1. This is more comments about, okay. Mel, Kissinger is definitely a kiss of death, Judas type. Yeah. I haven't read, what was Kissinger's big book that he wrote back in the 70s? I haven't read it. And, I was in the 4th grade. I mean, give me a break. But it's amazing that, how old is Kissinger now? Like 400? I'm not sure how old he is. Let's see. He was born in 1923 in the former Weimar Republic. He's, theoretically a Republican, but so that's what, 98 years old, 97 years old. He'll be 98 this May, and here's a article that just came out 8 days ago on Town Hall, and we'll see. I thought my computer was going better there, but that one's still a little slow, but we'll see how that comes out. But a couple of headlines about Kissinger. He's been in the news lately, of course, which is why this has been brought up. And he's talked about how this virus could create economic turmoil for generations. And I think he's right there. I don't know everything he said about it. And then probably because of that, here's Town Hall, Kissinger's call for a new world order. Among the works that first brought Henry Kissinger to academic acclaim was A World Restored, his 1950s book about how the greatest diplomats of Europe met at Congress of Vienna to restore order to a continent shattered by Napoleonic wars. Goes on through that. Writing in the Wall Street Journal Friday, Kissinger declared that it is now imperative that the world's leaders, even as they deal with a raging pandemic, begin to make the transition to the post-coronavirus order. Failure to do so could set the world on fire. Goes through, of course, all the article there that we will not read completely. This is by Pat Buchanan. Who, of course, has been well known for many years. But Pat Buchanan himself worked with Kissinger, didn't he, in the Nixon administration? Of course, Pat Buchanan was a young man at that time, and Henry Kissinger was a middle-aged man at that time. Let's see, Wayne, tell us, give me a little more of your opinion here. The MAD theory was mad indeed, still is, mid-ax dispensationalism. Would love to hear your comments on that. And would appreciate that. Yeah. Roger added one. I thought it said physicians, but it says physicists don't make good presidents. I would say, and again, I've got a lot of friends who are engineers, physicists, those guys. Again, their thinking is so laser beamed focus that they make great. A physicist makes a great physicist, right? But yeah, it is hard to broaden that and have enough of a leadership view when you're trained in that, when you do this over and over and over again. I think it becomes very, very difficult for those like that. Now, granted, there's no doubt some exceptions, but wasn't Jimmy Carter a nuclear? Well, he was a physicist, wasn't it? Nuclear something. And ran a nuclear submarine. But his degree in thinking was in nuclear science. And he was one of these that read every single line that came to him and knew and got so stuck in minutia that he couldn't lead the country. And I think that was the problem. Again, if you're a lawyer or an accountant or a physicist or a nuclear submarine operator, there is possibility to overcome that. I think you just have to recognize that as a weakness. And this is probably why our better presidents, and probably even most of our presidents, have not been all that highly educated. And even in their education, they weren't really known for academics. There's a lot more presidents that are Bill Clinton and George W. Bush-esque. Yeah, sure, they've got the Ivy League degrees, I know, but it was really just the fraternity that they did while they were there. And neither one of them was just known for their brilliance. Most presidents have been known more for their gut instinct. And President Trump just the other day said, or I saw the clip, maybe it was even today, one of the reporters asked him, it was about opening up the country, and one of the reporters, by the way, watching him deal with the reporters is the most entertaining thing on television. So one of the reporters asked him, what metric or metric, I think metric is the term he used. What metric are you going to use to make your decision? And Trump said, this one. He's exactly right, though. I heard once that great CEOs and executives that they did this kind of study. It was probably the engineers that did the study or the accountants that showed that the gut instinct decision that an executive makes after about 3 seconds ends up being the same decision if they go through all of the metrics and really weigh it all out. Then finally over here they come and they say, well, this would be the right decision to make. But by then it's too late. So we tend to elect presidents. The better presidents we elect have a little bit of that gut instinct on what needs to be done, and a gut instinct on political issues. Obviously, you've got to do that. So maybe that's why just not a lot of those people get elected, because they have such an understanding of their field, but can't figure out where other people are coming from and where to turn and slide on all of this. Yeah, okay, that's yeah. Thanks. CG, James Buchanan, 15th president before Lincoln, did nothing when the Union fell apart prior to the Civil War. And he was one of those who was Secretary of State and carried all that out. Now, Mel has a comment here. Longmire for president. Is that related to the television show? I have only watched one episode of Longmire. And of course, you know that it was filmed right here in New Mexico, that all of the scenes from Longmire are supposed to be someplace in Wyoming, but they're all right here in my neighborhood, just to let you know. It's fake. The whole thing's fake. The office is in Las Vegas, New Mexico, just over the mountain from me. But there we go. Okay. Let's see. Jeff, how did we forget that? We were talking about candidates that ran, Secretary of States that ran as a candidate, and we forgot about Hillary. What a glorious day. We forgot Hillary ran for president. Get your journal and write this down. It wasn't on the website we read of former Secretary of States who ran for president. Of course, that was probably obviously before that time. And until Jeff and Trinidad comes, we forgot Hillary, Secretary Clinton, ran for president of the United States 17 times. And didn't make it. She would make a terrible president, too. I think she's one of these that, in my opinion, does not have that gut instinct of how to lead or the gut instinct of politics. The thing that she had going for her was Bill Clinton had that. Bill Clinton was a fairly popular president, like him or not. He was fairly popular and electable. And kind of a good old boy. And Hillary just never was that. She rode coattails all the way through, and the coattails just could. Even Barack Obama had much more of a presence about him than Hillary. That's why he won and Hillary lost. And then in the last election, 2016 election, you know, it came down to what, her and Bernie, and Bernie probably has a little more sense of that, but Bernie's just got ideas that are, even in our liberal society, are not acceptable in our society. And so she ended up with it by default, kind of like the guy who's ending up with a Democratic nomination here on all of this. Let's see here. Yeah, I thought I was confused on the Robert, and that's why, because there's no Robert Kissinger. Well, there is a Robert Kissinger, but so we're going Henry all the way. That's all the way back to the beginning of that discussion. Oswald was his name. There we go. And see where we are here. Okay. That's the problems. Is you all go faster than I do, and then I have to catch up. Who killed JFK? A gun did it. That's right. That's what the Democrats say. A gun killed JFK. It's a gun. If we had banned guns, it wouldn't have happened. And would not have been a problem. The deep state, Roger in Arizona. The deep state involves, by the way, didn't Roger in Arizona did a great job on his songs last week? That trio that Roger in Arizona did. Speaking of tri-unity, That was very good, Roger. Thank you. The deep state involves the Federal Reserve. Look up Jekyll Island. Kennedy had started to bring the monetary system back under the Treasury Department. Interesting. Kennedy had the Treasury Department print Treasury notes to replace Federal Reserve notes. Then he got shot. Very interesting. And so maybe the CIA working together with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is an unbelievably powerful, what would you call it? There's a name for this. I want to say like pseudo-government organization, pseudo-government corporation. It, in one sense, is kind of separate on its own, and really not any checks and balances. If you remember, again, somebody probably knows more about this than I do, but the president gets to nominate some of the governors of the Federal Reserve. I'm not sure how many governors there are. And if memory serves me correctly, they serve 12-year terms. And then, so that means there are not the turnover is very big there. Now, could one of them be impeached? Maybe so, but I don't. I mean, there's just a lot. There's a ton of power there that basically it's given up. That's 14-year terms. Here, we'll put up Wikipedia. They know. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, commonly called the Federal Reserve Board, is the main governing body. It is charged with overseeing the Federal Reserve banks and with helping implement the monetary policy of the United States, appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate for staggered 14-year terms. I thought for a moment that said for a staggering 14-year term, which would be true as well. Staggered 14-year terms. I was trying to see how many of them there are. 7 members. So you stagger that out. We won't go through and read all that, but they've got a very long tenure there that takes place. Interesting that there are 2 vacant positions here. Both of those have been nominated here, probably being held up by the Senate. Who knows? Yeah, that's interesting that JFK was trying to pull that away. I think that some smart young man out there ought to spend time studying how to run an economy without the Federal Reserve Board. And of course, the Federal Reserve System was created in 1913. So it wouldn't be too hard to see how to do that. Go back to 1913, study the history, study the arguments that were against it in 1913. Of course, that was also the same time that we had the creation of the IRS, I believe, and the income tax. Here's a little bit on the Federal Reserve. Let's see. Created in 1913 with the enactment of the Federal Reserve Act after a series of financial panics led to the desire for central control. That right there ought to just scare us right there. Of the monetary system in order to alleviate financial crisis. And so all these kind of things led to the expansion of roles and responsibilities of the Federal Reserve System. That's Kennedy might have been onto something there, that it was getting out of hand and he needed to bring it back in, and part of that deep state brings it back. You know, there's a time when I would have thought all that to be loony. And I would have just trusted, hey, this is the system. We need it. You got to have a Federal Reserve. But then I learned to question the assumptions. And so now this goes everywhere to where I am saying now in question the assumptions, do you have to have a Federal Reserve system? Do you have to have an income tax system? Do you have to have all these members of the cabinet? Do you have to use vegetable oil when the recipe calls for vegetable oil? And I'm learning that there's a lot of different ways to do something. And I am convinced that we do have a deep state problem. I had a blog article about this maybe last week. Some of you probably read it. Of course, my blog articles are usually read worldwide. That is, I read them and Vina reads them. And so it's definitely worldwide. But Dispensational Publishing, I had this article about needing some term limits in the deep state, that the civil service jobs need to be not career jobs. And there's enough of them now that it would have a self-correcting kind of turnover. You wouldn't have to stagger the terms of various positions. Dr. Fauci, I had this in this blog article, he has been serving in the government under the CDC since I am not a spring chicken, was 3 years old. 1968, he started working for the one of the branches of the CDC. And so this is a long time, again, without any kind of turnover. So that's very interesting that you put there. Dan, who's a lawyer who could probably run for president, just to keep myself safe in all of that. Dan, run for president. Start out with governor of Colorado, perhaps. They need some help up there. Highly recommended book, a novel about the Kennedy assassin, The Third Bullet by Stephen Hunter. Y'all check that book out. As a matter of fact, if anybody wants that book, I can probably get that book for about 35% off the cover price. Now, sometimes the squirrels on Amazon sell it even greater discount. So you find out what it is. You send me the name of the book. Say, hey, I want that. That's true with any book. If you want a book, I will try to get it. If it's still in print, I usually can get it and can get it to you about 35% off the cover price on a special order kind of thing. So check that out. My blog article, by the way, it's time to put a term limit on the deep state. And you can go back and read that. And that was, let's see, from April the 9th, a few days ago. Had one just today, by the way. Who is the naked man? Go to Dispensational Publishing, click blog. Who was that naked man? You can see it. That's the one in Mark chapter 14 in the Garden of Gethsemane. I think I got a pretty good argument for who he was. I preached about it last week in whatever segment that was, whatever night we were preaching about. That would have been Thursday night, I guess. But I spent some more time on it since then, studied, tried to put some of the pieces together, and carried that out. So the book Dan recommends, The Third Bullet by Stephen Hunter. And I appreciate that. And CG, is it Charles? We'll go with CG. Think of it this way. Who benefited from the JFK assassination? Kennedy had a problem with a particular nation who was developing a nuclear program at the time. Yeah, this is, we go. So the Marine, God bless you. We need more good Marines. Isn't that something people called you a conspiracy theorist if you believed that the government had a deep state? Then Trump got elected and it came out of the closet. I wrote about that just a little bit in that particular blog article. Again, it's time to put a term limit on the deep state. And what I said about that is that the I'll tell you what I said here in just a moment here. Aren't computers wonderful? I get it up to size where you can read it. Right at the top, what the average Joe had not even heard of a few years ago has now become an everyday, real and present danger. At least since the election of Donald Trump, deep state reality has become a water cooler topic in just about every community of thinking men and women. I totally agree with you, Maureen, and that is that a few years ago, prior to Trump, you're right. If you talked about a deep state, you were just one of those conspiracy theorists. You probably had late night, you listened to Art Bell on the late night, and he's no longer around, so you got Randy White. But yeah, when Trump got elected, that put the deep state into overdrive. And Trump, I think, also has the keen ability to kind of recognize that. I saw this at work the other day when, this may be in a week ago or so. It was again one of these news conferences. I haven't listened to all that many of them, but I did happen to be listening this particular day. And some reporter raised their hand and said, the Inspector General put out a report that said blah, 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 blah. And his first question was, his first question was, what's the Inspector General's name? It was a pretty simple question, right? What's the Inspector General's name? And the reporter, it was classic. I don't know the Inspector General's name. That is, the reporter hadn't done the work. Trump has this ability to know when the gotcha question is there and to throw out the question and boom, hit the gotcha. Jesus kind of did that too, if you look at how he answered the Pharisees. So he wanted to know the name. I'm sorry, I don't know the name. And so Trump went on. Now someone later came up and said, it's Susie Q. And so then Trump immediately said, who appointed her? I don't know. A few minutes later, after he threw that out, she was appointed in January. And with that, he said, okay, I'll look into it. Then through it, the questioning continued to go back and forth through a number of other things. And through it, it comes out, actually, she was appointed to her current position, but she was an Obama appointee. Now, Trump sniffed that out from the very question. He's got the ability to do this. And so because of that, he has got the deep state running a little bit scared, I think. And he's got, average Joes like me and you knowing about the deep state, recognizing what it is. It's not just the conspiracy theorists. And the conspiracy theorists, I don't know, maybe they were a little right through some of this. But Mel comes along and says, lost my place there, but why do some pastors deny the deep state? I'm going to find the question here in a moment. Yeah, they do deny. I think it's because pastors are a little bit, can I say deep state themselves? And not in the government, obviously, but pastors need the system to continue like it is, the system in their church, the system in their community. And so to point the things out there, they're not going to get invited to the Rotarians to, say the prayer at the Rotarian pig roast if they do all this. They benefit from the deep state. I said they were part of the deep state. Maybe I should say they benefit from the deep state. And this is the problem that comes in there. Pastors are terrible. I was talking to a pastor today. He was agreeing with me. We were agreeing on this. Pastors are terrible, the world's worst at questioning the assumptions. And only a person who questions the assumptions questions the deep state. And pastors just do not want to do it. For, I suppose, a number of reasons that, are there. Let's see. Another book coming here from Rick out in Alcatraz on the issue of JFK assassination, the book On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. Excellent book. I've heard of Jim Garrison, haven't read any of his books. The Marine, what do you think is the balance for Christians between Romans 13, 1 and 2, and standing against the government? Let's pull up Romans 13, which of course many of you will recognize. And it says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, a couple of things that I will say here to answer this very good question. What's the balance between Romans 13 and when do you stand against the government? Now, the thing that I would say here, I'm in the process of pulling up my notes on Romans 13 from when I had taught that. In fact, I'm just going to bring them on the screen and let you see them because I probably said it better there than I would here. The term higher power should not be interpreted in a spiritualistic New Age way. The Greek simply says the authorities above you. This would naturally vary from one circumstance to another. This only applies to authorities that have been ordained of God, not voluntary associations or authorities which go beyond their God-given jurisdiction. So again, when we come over here to Romans 13, the powers that be are ordained of God. But sometimes there are self-ordained powers. I happen to think that in our current situation with COVID-19 and the crisis declarations that almost every governor, mayor, county commissioner, dog catcher has brought upon or declared for themselves are not powers that are ordained of God. They are powers that I'm not even sure are ordained of the Constitution of we the people. I think that, for those of you who are lawyers out there, there ought to be, when this is over, a boatload of lawsuits. I saw just yesterday that a church in Albuquerque is suing the governor, or the state of New Mexico, whichever you sue, I'm not sure. I think it's the governor. And it is because the governor shut down one of their church services. We could talk about whether they should have a church service or shouldn't have a church service. But I was glad to see the lawsuit, actually, because I think that the governor did go too far. As a matter of fact, at 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, my phone gets that beep, 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 beep. You know how it goes. And it's the governor sending out an emergency signal to everyone, which I think is an abuse of that system too, by the way, saying it's still not safe to go out. That includes going to church. So, sent to every New Mexican, it's not safe to go to church at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. A little link there to nmgov. Or New Mexico, .gov. And a page that says then at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, she's changed and taken away the exemption that was for churches. Now, why did she do it 5 o'clock on Saturday? Because there's no time to put a restraining order. No time. I think it's an abuse of power. So one of the churches in Albuquerque went forward with it. And they said, that order came in too late to do anything, and so they had their service. Now, wise, unwise, whatever, you could discuss that. But I think that the curfew in Taos, New Mexico at 10 p.m., that you can't be out after 10. Don't worry, I'm in the shed. I live right just, you could throw a rock to my house. So I'm okay. But all of these things, somebody needs to have some lawsuits just to say, are these even legit? Now, to your question, what's this balance? Let's get back to my notes. Now, I wrote, when I studied the book of Romans, the Declaration of Independence seems to understand this verse well. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Again, we ought to ask in these days. Now, again, that's the Declaration of Independence, which is not a governing document, but are we as a nation carrying out this inalienable right, or these inalienable rights that we have said are endowed by their Creator, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Now, what I want to say about that is our Declaration of Independence, and then later the Constitution of the United States, we the people, instituted this idea that there is a power ordained of God called government, but that power comes from the people. And so again, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So we happen to have a governmental system. Government is ordained of God, but government decrees are not ordained of God. Laws are not ordained of God. That is, a particular ordinance is not ordained of God. The CARES Act was not ordained of God. I will go so far as to say Donald Trump being president was not ordained of God, nor was Jimmy Carter being president ordained of God. God ordained government for a government role. So what we ought to do is look and say, in order to have this balance, to say, am I being anti-government, or am I being anti-ordinance, anti-official, against one of the aspects of government? I don't think those are issues ordained by God. Now, the New Living Translation, I notice I've got a note here, the New Living Translation got this wrong down at the bottom here on the bottom left. It translated it, those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. Truth is, this verse does not say this, only that the positions themselves, really that the government itself, the role of the government. Now, if you carried this out and looked to say, okay, there is a biblical role of, let's say, the husband. Let me use a different one. There's a biblical role of the pastor. And there's an authoritative role of the pastor. Now, what if the pastor comes and says to you as a married couple, hello, married couple, wife, at 5:30 p.m., you are to have chicken and biscuits on the table. At 6:15 p.m., husband, you are to gather the dishes and set them at the sink. Go on and dictate everything about their lives. Well, touch not God's anointed. Let me tell you, the pastor is not anointed to tell the wife when to cook or how to cook, or the husband when to do dishes. Then could the pastor claim, well, you've got to, there's no power but the powers that are ordained of God. He could say that, but the discerning listener would say, wait a minute, you're out of bounds. Your authority that you're expressing is not within the powers of God. So what are the powers of God in government? I'm going to say that it's probably not a 10 p.m. curfew or a can't go to church order, even for the collective good. That's not within the role of government. The government, I wouldn't mind if the government said, please don't do this. Your grandma's going to die if you do this. We beg you not to do this. Then, that's the power of influence. And if they were doing that, they would, get a doctor up to do that. They would get a lawyer up to do that. They would get a grandmother up to do that, and a grandchild, little sweet little girl up there says, for grandma's sake, please don't go. And that would be the power of influence. I don't have a problem with the power of influence. Take influence and use it best you can use it. But I think that it's really going on too far. My notes on verse 2, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. I wrote that it requires maturity to determine when you are subject unto higher powers and when those powers have moved beyond God-given authority. It invites judgment to resist authority that God has given. Note, by the way, that judgment is probably a better word than damnation, because eternal judgment is not in mind here. This particular word always requires an interpretive translation based upon its context. Compare the same word in Romans chapter 11, verse 3, how unsearchable are his judgments. So it's the same word there. And this is just a case that between 1611 and 2020, the word damnation has come to, in our mind in 2020, it means you go to hell. And that's not really what they intended the word to mean there. So the balance for Christian between Romans 13, 1 and 2 and standing against the government, I think that there is such a very small thread of biblical authority that is in our government today that the Christian probably needs to lean towards how do I resist the government? I'm not saying, don't pay your taxes and don't drive the speed limit. But I am saying use your influence to say there's so much government, we've got to get rid of these things. We need to close down Homeland Security. We need to close down the Department of Education. We need to close down the Department of Energy. We need to close down the Federal Reserve Board. We could do without 90% of our government, maybe more than that. There are, in the executive branch of the government, 1 million employees? Is that too much of a stretch? I don't know if it is or not. The Department of Agriculture has 100,000 employees. So you go against every OSHA requirement, and you're going to get up against God. I'm not sure there. I think Christians, I think there needs to be more of a Christian voice that says it's time for us to question every single thing our government does. Every single thing our government does. Jackie Kennedy thought LBJ had her husband killed. Interesting. Wouldn't you kind of consider LBJ part of the deep state? Again, I was born when LBJ was president, so I did not vote for him. But wasn't he elected originally in the, 1940s? He had 25 years of government as I think he went into the House first, and then he was a senator, and then he became president. and sure seemed to be all, knee deep in the grime there. So he might have had it. I agree with Clint. Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK all by himself. Now, who was behind him is another story. Yeah, I think he probably was the trigger man, but who's behind all that in there? Kenneth Copeland was trying to heal someone of the coronavirus through their TV, and he started yelling at people that they should pay their tithes. The guy is a piece of work, isn't he? Amazing there. Let's see. And Chuck's telling me to cut Nathan's pay. Yeah, since he's not here tonight, working. Although he was telling me today, he said, if you lay me off, I get more money by unemployment than working for you. So, fortunately, he hates government handouts, so he'll probably keep working for me. But isn't that terrible? I think Lindsey Graham was talking about this kind of loophole where not only unemployment, but they're adding this $600. And he somehow ran across it. He'd make more money if I would lay him off and furlough him, whatever it takes for all that. It would be dishonest, but would take that. You're right, Joel. In Grand Rapids, this is how the Antichrist will gain a following. Look at the sheeples today: Copeland, Hinn, Osteen, coronavirus, on and on and on and on and on. It goes just goes forever through all that. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I'm catching up here. I make sure I don't miss anything. But I got some newspaper articles I want to show you. But I want to make sure I get all your questions in too. Like Bev, any significance to the talk about how? Yes, there is. We're all in this together. There's been a lot of talk about this lately, I've heard this so many times. Oh, we're all in it together. We're all in it together. Yes, we're all in it together. You could probably, if you had the capability of doing it, do a little search of politicians and the movie stars and the influencers. We're all in it together. We're all in it together. I think there is some significance to this. And Bev uses the word that maybe was on a late night talk show, I'm not sure, about being a global citizen. We're global citizens. We're all that is a push. It may be just a push through changing our thinking, but it's a push to be, again, a borderless world, a borderless society, that we're all in this together. And, we've got to take one for the team. There's a lot of propaganda in that, if nothing else. Good point there. Let's see here. Okay, Dan's not going to run for president, but a legislator. We could use some good legislators. So go for it. The third bullet, $11.94 at Amazon. I probably can't even beat that price. Dan says, it was Bob that gave the price. Dan said, the third bullet postulates a fascinating theory, apocryphal, yes, but fascinating, of how the real shooter wasn't LHO. Who's LHO? If you like guns and gun ballistics, you'll be into it. Stephen down in Florida again. Are you aware that the BBN radio network, Bible Broadcasting Network, based in, are you aware of the BBN radio network based in Charlotte, have about 150 stations? They read the whole King James Bible twice a year. I'm not aware of BBN. A number of years ago, about the time I moved to Taos, I totally got off radio, and I haven't kept up with it since then. And One of the reasons I got off of it is because it was just so tremendously expensive. Uh, and I discovered, now this is probably not true if you keep on it long enough, which I didn't. But at that time, we were just doing a weekly program. And it was a weekly weekend Ask the Theologian program. But all of our response in terms of questions coming in, even financial response, people who began to follow our ministry, were listening to it online. And so I just decided at that point, I'm just going to invest in online capabilities, in online knowledge, and not do radio anymore. But there are some good old networks out there. BBN may be one of them. Appreciate that. Okay. Now that I think I have come to the end of your questions, I want to show you Lee Harvey Oswald. Why couldn't I remember that? Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. So I found some interesting articles from 1902, and I think I want to take this one first. Let's see here. This is from the Baptist and Reflector newspaper, 1902. And the Baptist and Reflector was a Southern Baptist newspaper. I think it still exists, if I'm not mistaken. The Baptist Convention of Tennessee has some degree of this. It appears that in 1902, there was a debate going on. And I actually went through a good bit of the 1902 Baptist and Reflector and read some on this debate that was happening. And the interesting thing is it was about when the church began. Which, of course, is something that I'm interested in. It has affected my life. I think that it's part of rightly dividing the word of truth is, when did the church begin? Now, I wish I could go through really just this whole thing and carry it out. I can't. But here is an article by S.W. Hampton. I'm not sure who that is, of the Baptist and Reflector, August 21st, 1902. And he goes on from the article of Brother Ball 3 weeks ago, and that of our anonymous brother in your paper on June 26th. Again, this is August 21st. It's been going on since this argument. It looks like it started in about March of 1902. It appears that we're writing on different subjects. Now, Brother Ball and the anonymous brother disagreed with Brother Hampton. In my article to which they object, I was writing of the first Christian church, the first local church organized under the new dispensation, in contradistinction to the Mosaic church of the old dispensation. Okay, check that out. He says the Christian church different than the Mosaic church. Then they, if I understand them, are writing about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of Christ. Now, if I read the Bible aright, the kingdom of Christ began on earth with the promise of God to Adam that the seed of the woman should bruise the serpent's head. This was God's promise of a coming Savior through whom alone he could be made. I wouldn't necessarily agree with all that, but he's right in making the distinction. He goes on to say, the Jew was saved by his faith in the Savior to come and by his performance of those rites and ceremonies which kept in mind the promise of his coming. I really would agree with that, though I talk often about how they didn't have the kind of salvation that they were trusting in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what I argue about. But they were looking for a coming Savior. And they had faith that the Savior, the Messiah, was going to come. So he puts this very well. Again, we're going to end up with a different conclusion, but the Jew was saved by his faith in the Savior to come and by his performance of those rites and ceremonies, which kept in mind the promise of his coming. We are saved by faith in the same Savior who has come. Abel's expression, and he goes on to say some things here. Now, God first organized his visible church as a chosen people, a nation of 12 tribes, under the leadership of Moses, himself a type of Christ. At first, that sounds offensive because we'd say, no, the church didn't start in Moses. But he's already argued that they were very much a different part of the church. So he's using the same terminology that the King James would use to talk about the church in the wilderness. So he says, yeah, there was the church in the wilderness. It was under Moses. And then it goes on to say, let's see, they were under the Moses and under the rites and ceremonies. In the fullness of God's time, the ceremonial law and service law were to be consummated and terminated by the coming and promised Savior in the atoning work and death. The former is known to the Bible-reading world as the Old Dispensation, the latter as the New or the Christian Dispensation. The Old Dispensation could not be complete until the promised Savior had come into the world as a man, had kept the law of God perfectly, had died for man's sin, had broken the bonds of death and risen to life again, had ascended to the Father, and then, as promised, had sent his Spirit to take the leadership and guidance of the people. For the new dispensation was to be a spiritual dispensation, no longer a service of sacrifices offering rites, forms, and ceremonies in which the worshiper could only approach God through the medium of a priest, a fallible man like himself, but under the law. And he goes on to talk about how that has changed. Now, we'll come back to that in just a moment. Again, in the end, he's going to end up in a place that I don't agree with. But he's strongly arguing here there was the old dispensation and the new dispensation. And the thing that I like about his argument is he very clearly says the Gospels were not part of the new dispensation. And as I read through this series of articles, what I discovered is this guy is going to end up with a day of Pentecost start for the dispensation. I would disagree with that. That's where he's going to end up. Now, what I would say about this fellow is he does a better job arguing it than do Acts 2 dispensationalists today. Acts 2 dispensationalists today end up, like, let's take a John MacArthur, for example. They end up bringing in the Gospels into it, even though they'll say, yeah, the church started at the day of Pentecost, and we should obey the Sermon on the Mount. Well, that's illogical. And this guy's arguing it. Now, the argument, as I read through in this 1902, the argument was actually whether the church started with the arrival of Jesus or with the arrival of the day of Pentecost. I wish they had thought a little more and said there's more than two options. And that might have made a huge difference. But what really struck me, again, in this ongoing argument that was given in 1902, and I'd love to just spend a lot of time going through a whole bunch of it, even more, but there's too much to do. I need to print them all up or put them in an article or something and give the history of the 1902 argument in Tennessee about the start of the church, because their arguments show that at least in 1902, they understood that it mattered where you start the church. I don't think in a Baptist paper today, you could even carry on such argumentation, because people would be like, who cares? Doesn't matter. I mean, do we just love God and love others? And here, again, even though I would come up with a very different position than he does, all of these were arguing that it is of fundamental importance when the church starts. I was talking, was it just today or yesterday, I don't remember, was talking about how there is a, now I forgot where I was going. Is it getting late? How there is this utter lack of any kind of theological discussion and training that goes on, lack of ability to carry on the conversations. And so in the church today, outside of the mid-Acts movement, there's not even the discussion. The only discussion is mid-Acts movement studies the issue, and they, whether you agree with them or not, they would appreciate the argumentation here because the argumentation says it matters. And indeed, it does matter. Then the only other people that will even talk about it are parrots who say, oh, those ultra dispensationalists, they're mad. They started in the wrong place. And that, I think they need to step up to the plate. So I think the Acts 2 dispensationalists really need to step up to the plate and say, what, if you're an Acts 2 dispensationalist, which is the vast majority of dispensationalism, if you're an Acts 2 dispensationalist, you have to, at least to be consistent, not use the Gospels in determining what the gospel is. You got to start it at Acts chapter 2 if you're going to be an Acts 2 dispensationalist. And furthermore, you've got to, and he says this in here somewhere, I wish I could find it for you. He talks about, or maybe it's one of the others that discusses that if you're an Acts 2 dispensationalist, you've got to take the things of the Pentecostal powers and put them into the church somewhere. So, my whole interest in all of this is just to say, in 1902, these guys were talking some real serious issues about the start of the church. And I may write them up into a little bit of a summary, or at least print out all the arguments so that you can read them sometime, because they're pretty powerful stuff that goes on through there. Mel mentions the Acts 11:26 where they were first called Christians, and in one of the articles here, and again, there were 6 or 8 articles that I found that went through all this, and just some really, again, some fascinating stuff that was carried out there. The discussions that were through there. Let's see. I'll just pull up one more here real quick if I can do it, although I'm just not sure. I need a restart on that computer because it's going so slowly. Well, here we go. Let me see if I can bring that one up, or was that the one that I just read? I might have brought up the wrong one. No, it's a different one. Here we go. Let's pull this up very, very slowly. Yeah, sorry, my computer's just not going to cooperate with it there. That's what happens when you run your computer for 14 days and never turn it off and reset it, all those kind of things. It's got all stopped up. Well, we are going to we're going to go in just a minute, but let me mention Mel's comments here. When Moses' law was broken, 3,000 died. Acts 2, when the Spirit was given, 3,000 were saved. The law of Moses, the law of Christ division. Though the but now was not revealed yet due to the legitimate offer of the kingdom. So she says, I'm an Acts church and a Pauline dispensationalist. Paul and the kingdom church transitioned. I think that's the little booklet called The Church of the New Testament, distinguishing the differences between the apostolic and the Paulinian assemblies. I think probably you would align about the same place there. An Acts 2 church with a Paulinian dispensationalism. And, something happened in Acts 2. An organization gathered together around Peter in Acts 2, no doubt about it. And the scripture does call that the church. So if you divide out the church in our book, The Church Graphically Presented, that we did last Labor Day, I have a graph in there, a chart in there about the church, about which church is it. Because there's the church in the wilderness, there's the church that Jesus is going to build, there's the church that Peter was part of, there's the church that Paul was part of, there is the church that is the entire body of Christ that's going to meet in heaven at the rapture. So all these assemblies, you have to take it and you have to define that and see what that goes. Well, thank you all very much. It's midnight, isn't it? Do you know where your children are? Time to sing the Star-Spangled Banner and go out, isn't it? I am delighted that you've joined us. Tomorrow is Wednesday, isn't it? And what we will have on Wednesday is Ask the Theologian at 10 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time, and the Gospel of John at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So 2 broadcasts tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you. We'll be Studio B, the shed, for Ask the Theologian, and then we will be from the Taos pulpit at 6 p.m. for the Gospel of John. I look forward to seeing you there. RandyWhiteMinistries.org. It has been fun to talk to you about the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal, and a lot of things in between. I hope each one of you have a wonderful and blessed night. God bless you.